her a small, reassuring nod as she returned to her seat. Ethan's quiet cooing greeted her, and she felt a wave of relief. The judge recessed to deliberate, and the wait felt interminable. Every second stretched into an eternity as Emily sat with Mark, Mrs. Turner, and Jennifer. Even Ethan seemed to sense the tension, his usual babbling replaced by quiet whimpers. Finally, the judge returned. Everyone rose as she took her seat and began to read her decision. Her words were clear and firm. The restraining order would be made permanent, and Victor Walker would face charges for child abuse. Victor erupted in outrage, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "This isn't justice," he shouted as officers moved to escort him out. "You're all gonna regret this." But his threats were empty against the gavel that struck with finality. Emily clung to Ethan, tears streaming down her face. Not of fear, but of profound relief. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Emily. You did it." For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to believe those words. The days after the court hearing brought a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty for Emily. Victor was gone, locked away where he couldn't hurt her or Ethan anymore, but the scars he'd left behind were harder to banish. Even in the safety of Mrs. Turner's home, Emily found herself jumping at shadows and clenching her fists at the faintest sound of raised voices. Mark visited regularly, checking in on her progress. His presence was a comfort, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in her fight to rebuild a sense of normalcy. One afternoon, Mark sat with her on the back porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Ethan was asleep in a stroller nearby, his tiny breaths barely audible. "How's everything going, Emily?" Mark asked, his tone casual but laced with genuine concern. Emily shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's better," she said after a pause, "but I still feel scared, like he's watching, even though I know he can't be." Mark nodded, understanding. "That's normal. What you went through was terrifying, and it's going to take time for your mind to catch up with the fact that you're safe now." Emily glanced at him, her small face serious. "Do you think he'll come back? Even after what the judge said?" Mark's jaw tightened briefly. "Victor won't come near you again, Emily. He's being watched closely, and if he tries anything, we'll know about it." Emily seemed to take some comfort in that, though the worry in her eyes didn't entirely fade. Meanwhile, Mrs. Walker was undergoing her own transformation. With the support of CPS and counseling, she began to confront the years of abuse she had endured and the choices she had made under Victor's control. She knew she had to prove herself if she wanted to reunite with her children. Jennifer Carter kept Mark updated on Mrs. Walker's progress. "She's making strides," Jennifer reported during one of their meetings. "She's attending therapy sessions regularly and working on securing stable housing. But it's going to take time." Mark nodded, his mind on Emily. "Does Emily know?" "Not yet," Jennifer said. "We're waiting until there's more concrete progress. She's been through enough, and we don't want to give her false hope." Mark agreed. He knew how fragile Emily's trust was and how easily it could be shaken. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily was helping Mrs. Turner prepare dinner. The familiar routine of peeling carrots and setting the table brought a sense of calm. Ethan sat in a high chair, happily gnawing on a soft, teething toy. The peace was broken by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Emily froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Mrs. Turner quickly stepped in, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's all right," she said gently. "Stay here. I'll check." Emily nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Her ears strained to catch every sound as Mrs. Turner walked to the door. There was a brief pause, followed by a quiet conversation. Then, Mrs. Turner returned, her expression calm but serious. "Emily," she said softly, "it's your mom." Emily's eyes widened. She hadn't seen her mother since the day she'd fled with Ethan. Part of her wanted to run to her, to feel her mother's arms around her again. But another part, the part that remembered her mother's silence during Victor's reign of terror, held her back. "Do you want to see her?" Mrs. Turner asked, giving Emily the choice. After a long pause, Emily nodded. "Okay." Mrs. Walker stood in the living room, looking more vulnerable than Emily had ever seen her. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and her eyes were rimmed with red, but there was a new determination in her posture. "Emily," she said softly, her voice cracking, "I've missed you so much." Emily stayed near the doorway, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone cautious. Mrs. Walker swallowed hard. "I've been working with CPS. I'm trying to get better, to be the mom you and Ethan deserve." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you stop him before?" Tears welled in Mrs. Walker's eyes. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I was weak, but you were so strong, Emily. You saved Ethan when I couldn't. And now I'm trying to be strong too." Emily stared at her mother, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to believe her, to trust that her mother was finally ready to fight for them. But the wounds were still fresh. Mrs. Walker stepped closer, her hands trembling. "I know it's going to take time," she said, "but I want to earn your trust again. I want us to be a family." Emily hesitated, her gaze shifting to Ethan, who was watching curiously from his high chair. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to prove it." Mrs. Walker nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I will," she promised. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about her mother's visit. The anger and hurt were still there, but for the first time, they were accompanied by a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Mark's words echoed in her mind. "You're not alone anymore." And for the first time, she started to believe it. The days following Mrs. Walker's visit were a blend of cautious hope and lingering doubt. Emily couldn't shake the memory of her mother's tearful promises, but her heart was still guarded. Mrs. Turner, sensing the emotional strain, encouraged Emily to channel her thoughts through journaling. Every evening, Emily would sit by the window, scribbling her feelings onto the pages of a notebook Mrs. Turner had given her. One crisp autumn morning, Emily woke to the sound of soft murmurs from the kitchen. She padded down the hall and peeked around the corner. There, she saw Mrs. Walker sitting at the table with Mrs. Turner, sipping coffee. Their conversation was quiet, but the seriousness of their expressions told Emily they were discussing something important. Mrs. Turner noticed Emily first. "Good morning, Emily," she said warmly. "Come join us." Mrs. Walker looked up, her face a mixture of relief and nervousness. Emily hesitated but eventually walked over and sat down, her gaze darting between the two women. "Your mom wanted to talk to you about something," Mrs. Turner said gently. Emily's stomach twisted. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. Mrs. Walker took a deep breath. "I found a place for us to live," she said. "A small apartment, not far from here. CPS approved it, and they believe it's a good next step for us." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean, you want me and Ethan to come live with you?" Mrs. Walker nodded. "Only if you're ready," she said quickly. "I know I still have a lot to prove, and I'll understand if you need more time. But I want you to know I'm working hard to be better." Emily sat in silence, her mind racing. She glanced at Mrs. Turner, who gave her an encouraging nod. "You don't have to decide right now," Mrs. Turner said. "Take your time." That evening, Mark stopped by for one of his regular check-ins. Emily told him about her mother's offer, her voice a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "What do you think, Emily?" Mark asked after she finished. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's what I wanted for so long, for us to be together again. But I'm scared. What if she can't handle it?" Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "It's okay to be scared," he said. "Trust takes time to rebuild, and it's smart to be cautious. But it sounds like your mom is trying to make things right. If you feel ready, this could be a chance to start fresh." Emily fiddled with the hem of her sweater. "What if it doesn't work out?" Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Then we'll be here to help, just like we've been all along. You're not going into this alone, Emily." His words gave her a small measure of comfort. "Thanks, Mark," she said quietly. A week later, Emily made her decision. With Mrs. Turner and Mark's support, she agreed to move into the new apartment with her mother and Ethan. The transition was carefully planned, with regular visits from CPS to ensure everything was going smoothly. The apartment was modest but cozy. Emily's room had a bed with a soft pink quilt and a small desk by the window. Ethan's crib was set up in the corner of the living room, and toys were scattered across the floor. Mrs. Walker threw herself into creating a sense of normalcy for her children. She cooked meals, helped Emily with her homework, and spent hours playing with Ethan. Slowly, Emily began to relax. She even caught herself laughing sometimes, a sound that had felt foreign for so long. One night, as they sat together on the couch watching a movie, Mrs. Walker turned to Emily. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You've been so strong through everything. You're the reason we're here now." Emily looked down, her cheeks flushing with a mix of pride and embarrassment. "I just did what I had to," she said. Mrs. Walker reached out and gently took her hand. "You did more than that. You saved us." For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe her mother was right. But healing is rarely linear. Despite the growing stability, shadows from the past occasionally crept in. One afternoon, as Emily and Ethan played in the park, she heard a man's voice behind her. A deep, gruff voice that made her freeze. "Emily," the voice called. Her heart stopped. She spun around, clutching Ethan protectively. But it wasn't Victor. It was just a stranger asking if she'd dropped her scarf. Relief flooded her, but her hands shook as she realized how deeply ingrained her fear still was. When she told her mother about it later, Mrs. Walker hugged her tightly. "We're safe now," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore." Emily nodded, but the incident served as a reminder that the road ahead would still have its challenges. That evening, Mark visited to deliver some unexpected news. "We've just received word from the DA's office," he said. "Victor's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month." Emily felt her stomach churn. The thought of Victor still had the power to unsettle her deeply. Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't have to testify again. They have all the evidence they need to keep him away for a long time." Emily exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Good," she said. "I don't want to see him again." Mark nodded. "You won't have to." As he left, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Victor would soon face justice and a lingering unease about what his sentencing would bring. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about how far she'd come. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. She glanced at Ethan sleeping peacefully in his crib and smiled. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The sentencing hearing approached faster than Emily expected. Although she wouldn't have to face Victor again in court, the mere thought of the hearing dredged up old fears. Mrs. Walker tried to shield her from the details, but Emily could tell the weight of it was affecting her mother too. Mark came by the night before the hearing to reassure them. "Tomorrow is about closure," he said. "The judge will make it official. Victor won't be able to hurt you again." Mrs. Walker nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just want this to be over," she murmured. Emily stayed quiet, her gaze fixed on Ethan as he played on the floor. She felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Would the hearing truly put an end to Victor's control over their lives? The next morning, the apartment was filled with a tense silence. Emily sat at the kitchen table, picking at her breakfast while her mother paced the room. Jennifer Carter arrived to accompany Mrs. Walker to court, offering a steady presence amid the nerves. Emily watched her mother leave, feeling a pang of guilt for not going with her. But she knew this was something her mom had to face alone. Mrs. Turner came over to stay with Emily and Ethan. She suggested they bake cookies to keep busy, and soon the apartment was filled with the comforting smell of chocolate chip dough. As they worked, Emily found herself talking about the past few months, something she hadn't done much of since leaving the foster home. "It's weird," she said, shaping a ball of dough in her hands. "Sometimes I feel like things are getting better, but then I remember everything that happened, and it's like I'm back in that house again." Mrs. Turner nodded, her hands moving deftly as she placed cookies on a tray. "Healing takes time," she said gently. "You've been through more than most kids your age." but you've also shown incredible strength." Emily glanced at Ethan, who was happily banging a wooden spoon on the floor. "I just want him to grow up safe," she said softly. "He will," Mrs. Turner assured her, "because you've made sure of it." Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Mrs. Walker sat anxiously in the gallery. Victor was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, his face a mask of defiance. He refused to meet her gaze, but his presence still sent a chill down her spine. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, detailing Victor's history of abuse and the impact it had on Emily and Ethan. The defense offered little in response, knowing the evidence was overwhelming. When the judge delivered the sentence, 15 years in prison with no chance of parole for at least 10, Mrs. Walker felt a wave of relief wash over her. Victor would no longer be a threat to her family. But as she left the courthouse, a different emotion took hold: determination. This was her chance to rebuild, to prove to her children and to herself that she could be the mother they deserved. That evening, when Mrs. Walker returned home, Emily immediately sensed a change in her. Her mother's shoulders, usually hunched with worry, were held a little higher. Her eyes, though tired, held a spark of renewed resolve. "It's done," Mrs. Walker said, her voice steady. "He's gone." Emily nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Good." Mrs. Walker sat beside her, taking her hand. "We're free now, Emily. It's time for us to move forward." Over the next few weeks, the family settled into a new rhythm. Mrs. Walker found a part-time job at a local bakery, which she juggled with her therapy sessions. Emily returned to school, where she began to make friends and rediscover the joys of being a kid. Ethan, now crawling and babbling, became a beacon of light in their lives. His laughter filled the apartment, reminding them of how far they'd come. Mark and Jennifer continued to check in, their visits becoming less about oversight and more about celebrating the family's progress. One day, Mark brought a gift, a framed photo of Emily and Ethan, taken during one of their outings to the park. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, setting the frame on the mantel. "Hold on to it." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We will." One quiet evening, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about the journey they'd been on. There were still moments of fear and doubt, but they no longer defined her. She was learning to let go of the past, to focus on the future she was building with her family. She glanced over at Ethan, who was fast asleep in his crib. His tiny hand clutched a stuffed bear, his face peaceful. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, echoing the promise she'd made to herself weeks ago. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The air in the small apartment was filled with the quiet hum of life returning to normal. Days were no longer marked by fear but by simple routines. School for Emily, work for Mrs. Walker, an endless discovery for Ethan as he crawled around exploring every corner of their new home. One afternoon, Emily walked home from school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of leaves and distant fireplaces. She felt lighter, more at ease, though the shadows of the past still lingered at the edges of her mind. As she approached the apartment building, she spotted Mark's familiar figure leaning casually against his car, arms crossed, a smile on his face. "Officer Evans," Emily called out, a grin breaking across her face. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Mark," he corrected, stepping forward. "How many times do I have to tell you? I'm off duty." Emily laughed. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," he said with a shrug. "Thought I'd drop by and see how you and Ethan are doing." They walked into the building together. Inside, Mrs. Walker was in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up as she worked on dinner. Ethan sat in his high chair, waving a plastic spoon like a wand. "Mark," Mrs. Walker greeted him warmly. "You're just in time. Stay for dinner?" Mark hesitated, but Emily chimed in before he could decline. "You have to stay. Mom makes the best chicken pot pie." He chuckled. "Well, I can't say no to that." Dinner was lively. For the first time in a long while, laughter echoed through the apartment. Mark shared stories about his early days on the force, and even Mrs. Walker let out a genuine laugh at his tales of rookie blunders. After dinner, as Emily helped clear the table, Mark pulled her aside. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've come a long way since that day in the station." Emily looked down, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "It wasn't just me," she said. "You, Mrs. Turner, Jennifer. You all helped." Mark nodded. "But you made the choice to fight for your family. That takes real strength." Emily's eyes met his, filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Mark, for everything." Later that evening, after Mark had left, Mrs. Walker sat with Emily on the couch. The apartment was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and Ethan's soft snores from his crib. "I've been thinking," Mrs. Walker began, her voice hesitant. "Maybe it's time we start fresh in a new place." "A new city?" Emily's brow furrowed. "You want to move?" Mrs. Walker nodded. "We've come so far, but I think a fresh start could help us leave the past behind for good." Emily considered this. The apartment had become a haven, a place where they'd begun to heal. But she understood her mother's desire to rebuild their lives entirely, away from the memories that still haunted them. "Where would we go?" Emily asked. Mrs. Walker smiled softly. "I've been looking at a small town a few hours away. It's quiet, has a good school for you, and a safe community for Ethan." Emily nodded slowly. "If it's what you think is best, I'm okay with it." Mrs. Walker pulled her into a hug. "Thank you, Emily, for trusting me." The following weeks were a whirlwind of packing and preparations. Mark and Jennifer helped coordinate the move, ensuring a smooth transition. When the day finally came, Emily stood in the empty apartment, her hand resting on the doorframe. "Ready?" Mrs. Walker asked gently, holding Ethan in her arms. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, let's go." They loaded the last of their belongings into the car. As they pulled away, Emily watched the apartment building fade into the distance, a mix of sadness and hope swirling in her chest. Their new home was everything Mrs. Walker had promised. A small, cozy house with a backyard where Ethan could play once he started walking. The neighborhood was quiet, and their neighbors were friendly, often stopping by to introduce themselves and offer help. Emily quickly settled into her new school, making friends who didn't know about her past. For the first time, she felt like she could just be a kid again. Mrs. Walker found work at a local bakery, and the steady routine brought a sense of stability they hadn't known in years. Evenings were spent together, playing board games, watching movies, or simply enjoying each other's company. One night, as Emily lay in bed, she reflected on how much had changed. She thought about Victor, now a distant shadow in their lives, and the journey that had brought them here. For the first time, the future felt like a blank canvas, full of possibilities. She glanced at the framed photo Mark had given her, the one of her and Ethan at the park. It was a reminder of how far they'd come and the people who had helped them along the way. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, her heart full of quiet determination. And this time, there was no doubt in her mind. The first snow of the season blanketed the small town, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Emily stood by the living room window, watching as Ethan toddled through the backyard, bundled up in layers, his laughter muffled by the thick scarf around his neck. Mrs. Walker was outside with him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her smile was bright as she encouraged Ethan to chase after a ball. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the comforting aroma of cookies baking in the oven. Emily had just finished decorating the Christmas tree, carefully hanging each ornament in its perfect spot. This year, the tree wasn't just a symbol of the holidays. It was a testament to how far they'd come. The sound of a car pulling up drew her attention. She peeked out the window and smiled when she saw Mark stepping out, holding a wrapped gift under his arm. He knocked once before stepping in, brushing snow off his coat. "Merry Christmas, Emily," he said with a grin. "Merry Christmas, Mark," she replied, rushing over to greet him. Mark placed the gift under the tree and glanced around, nodding in approval. "The place looks great. Feels like home." Emily's smile widened. "It does." Mrs. Walker and Ethan soon joined them, bringing in the crisp scent of winter. Ethan, now walking with growing confidence, toddled over to Mark and tugged on his pant leg. "Hey there, buddy," Mark said, scooping him up. "You've gotten big since I last saw you." Ethan giggled, his small hands reaching for Mark's badge. They all gathered around the tree, and Mark handed out his gift. A new stuffed bear for Ethan, who hugged it tightly, and a journal for Emily, its leather cover embossed with her initials. "I thought you might like a fresh one," Mark said as Emily ran her fingers over the cover. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." Later that evening, after Mark had left and Ethan was tucked in bed, Emily and her mother sat together by the fire. The glow of the flames danced across their faces, casting long shadows on the walls. "Do you ever think about the past?" Emily asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the flickering fire. Mrs. Walker nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted, "it's hard not to, but I try to focus on how far we've come, and on what we have now." Emily leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I'm glad we're here." Mrs. Walker wrapped an arm around her. "Me too, sweetheart." They sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them like a protective blanket. In the following weeks, life settled into an easy rhythm. Emily thrived at school, earning praise from her teachers and forming close friendships. She joined the school's art club, where she found joy in sketching and painting, often drawing scenes from her new life. Ethan continued to grow, his curiosity and laughter filling the house with life. Mrs. Walker worked diligently at the bakery, her confidence blossoming with each passing day. Mark and Jennifer remained a constant presence, their visits serving as a reminder of the support system that had helped them rebuild. Though their roles shifted from guardians to friends, the bond they shared with the family remained unbreakable. One evening, Emily sat in her room, writing in her new journal. She reflected on the journey they had taken, the challenges they had overcome, and the people who had stood by them. She wrote about her dreams for the future, traveling, becoming an artist, and ensuring Ethan grew up knowing only love and safety. As she closed the journal, a sense of peace washed over her. The past no longer felt like a weight she had to carry alone. It was a part of her story, but it didn't define her. She glanced out the window, where the last traces of snow glistened under the moonlight. The world felt vast and full of possibilities. "We made it," she whispered to herself, a quiet smile on her lips. And for the first time, those words felt not like a hope, but a truth she could hold on to forever. The end.